Well, nearly unprecedented news always seems to break while I'm trying to record my podcast. Maybe I should stop and the world will, descend into peace. Doubtful, but it might be worth a try. So Joe Biden has apparently announced that he will not be running for president. So far, things are going right on schedule for my predictions. I predicted that even though Trump was leading before the debate, that his numbers would jump up after the debate, that the debate was merely for the Democrats to demonstrate that Biden was not capable of being the nominee, after which time they would be forced to go through the whole charade of pretending like this was all shocking news before picking a new candidate. Well, here we are. Only thing left to see is, am I going to be right about who that candidate is? Now, the most obvious choice is to go with Kamala Harris. She's the VP. But, let's be honest for a moment here. That woman doesn't have two neurons to rub together. I'm sorry, but I can't afford to be nice about the president of the country. You have to have somebody who's qualified. Pardon the pun. That trumps any considerations of being nice about this. She's awful. The polls show she's awful. People voted for Obama, but they are not going to vote for her. You can't guilt them into it by playing, the unprecedented first black woman president card. That's not going to be enough to carry you. It's just not. Plus, she's part of the Biden administration, which means that every policy, his senility aside, every policy from open borders, the fentanyl crisis, being an absolute abject failure on every foreign policy decision. This, according to the Secretary of Defense, when he was VP, that he has never been right on a single foreign policy issue. The economy, all of these things, Kamala inherits from him because she's part of the administration that put the rising crime rates, the rising inflation, the rising drugs, the two wars going on in the world, all of this sort of stuff follows her right into that candidacy. Plus, people don't like her, people don't trust her, people don't believe she's capable. And if I'm being honest, that seems to be a pretty accurate assessment. So, technically, are they supposed to go with her? Yeah. Are they going to waste this opportunity by doing that? I'm still sticking with my initial prediction that Michelle Obama sets aside her deeply held desire to live a private life and sacrifices it all for the glory of the country. Stay tuned. And now, for my actual podcast. Let's do this. Sounding the Alarms of Chaos, Part 1. There's a scene that I have always loved from the movie The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Sometimes we're on a collision course, and we just don't know it. Whether it's by accident or by design, there's not a thing we can do about it. A woman in Paris was on her way to go shopping, but she had forgotten to get her coat. Went back to get it. When she had gotten her coat, the phone had rung. So she stopped to answer it. Talked for a couple of minutes. While the woman was on the phone, Daisy was rehearsing for a performance at the Paris Opera House. While she was rehearsing, the woman, off the phone now, had gone outside to get a taxi. Now, the taxi driver had dropped off a fare earlier and had stopped to get a cup of coffee. And all the while, Daisy was rehearsing. This cab driver, who dropped off the earlier fare and stopped to get a cup of coffee, picked up the lady who was going shopping and had missed getting an earlier cab. The taxi had to stop for a man crossing the street who had left for work 5 minutes later than he normally did because he forgot to set his alarm. While that man, late for work, was crossing the street, Daisy had finished rehearsing and was taking a shower. And while Daisy was showering, the taxi was waiting outside a boutique for the woman to pick up a package which hadn't been wrapped yet because the girl who was supposed to have wrapped it had broken up with her boyfriend the night before and forgot. When the package was wrapped, the woman, who was back in the cab, was blocked by a delivery truck. All the while, Daisy was getting dressed. The delivery truck pulled away and the taxi was able to move, while Daisy, the last to be dressed, waited for one of her friends who had broken a shoelace. While the taxi was stopped, waiting for a traffic light, Daisy and her friend came out the back of the theater. And if only one thing had happened differently, if that shoelace hadn't broken, or if that delivery truck had moved moments earlier, or that package had been wrapped and ready because the girl hadn't broken up with her boyfriend, or that man had set his alarm and got up 5 minutes earlier, or that taxi driver hadn't stopped for a cup of coffee, or that woman had remembered her coat and got into an earlier cab, Daisy and her friend would have crossed the street, and the taxi would have driven by. But life, being what it is, a series of intersecting lives and incidents out of anyone's control, that taxi did not go by, and that driver was momentarily distracted, and that taxi hit Daisy, and her leg was crushed. Her leg had been broken in 5 places, and with therapy and time, she might walk again, but she'd never dance. There's a profound reality in that scene. All these intersecting events happening in the lives of people who didn't even know each other had impacts that they never knew about. They continued to live their lives completely unaware of the ripple effects they had on each other, just as each of us do. But just because we are almost always unaware of the ripples that we send out, doesn't mean that they aren't there. They are. And they are being caused all the time. A man flew into New York City on a September day. He was supposed to meet with his colleague, Elaine, to prep for their conference over dinner. But his flight was delayed several hours, and they had to wait until the next morning, the 11th, to meet. His shirt was wrinkled, and he was disheveled from spending over 10 hours traveling on a plane. Then Elaine surprised him with a gift, a Monet tie to add to his collection. She had gone out of her way to get it for him because he had told her how much he liked these ties of Impressionist paintings. He was so moved by her kind and obviously thoughtful gesture that he decided to put the tie on right away and wear it to their conference. But his white shirt was badly wrinkled, and the only other shirt he had was a pale green one, which clashed. Elaine insisted that he could not wear the Monet tie with that green shirt, so he quickly headed back to his hotel room to iron his white shirt, with plans to meet her at the conference in a few minutes. While he was ironing his shirt, a plane hit the World Trade Center, where the conference was being held, and killed Elaine on impact. He survived only because he had developed a love for Impressionist ties and happened to mention it to someone in passing, who chose to make him a spontaneous gift after his flight had been delayed, leaving him in a wrinkled shirt. Saying a kind word to someone in a coffee shop might turn their day around. They might have a brighter outlook that lasts for the rest of the day. They might conceive a child that night because of the good day they had. The existence of that child will change the lives of countless people who meet and interact with that person throughout their life. The ripples never stop. And every choice we make, especially in how we treat each other, is important and will have impacts that keep on going long after we're gone, even if we never know about them. In 1905, in Wisconsin, a woman had a mental breakdown after having 4 children in quick succession. Her husband came home one day and found that she had murdered their 4 children and then had committed suicide. Nearly a decade later, he finally remarried, and with his second wife, he had another family. One of their children was the grandfather of Brian Klaas, the author who compiled the stories I will be sharing in this series, in his book, Fluke. As a young man, he had to grapple with the fact that he would not even exist if not for this awful event that claimed the lives of 4 small children. Without that tragedy, his great-grandfather would not have remarried, meaning that he would never have been born, which means I would not have heard any of these stories, and I would not have shared them with you. We're all interconnected by the ripples we don't ever see. It's worthwhile to be mindful of that fact. There is no moment of our life that doesn't at least slightly change us. And as a result of our being a little different, we change the people around us a little bit, and the ripples keep spreading. Everything we do matters. When Marty McFly goes back in time, his instinct to push his father out of the way of an oncoming car has ripple effects that erase his very existence. It's the premise of every time travel plot. Don't change anything, or the effects will create a future that is unrecognizable. But if every decision we make in the past can change the present, and we all seem to accept that it would, then by extension, everything we do in the present has an equally big impact on the future. Even the exact moment we were each conceived, if anything about it had been different, a different child would have been born instead of us. That's a fact. Every moment, every detail counts. Choosing to press your snooze button in the morning does change what would have happened otherwise. Permanently. To quote a pretty good movie, what we do in life echoes in eternity. We control nothing, but we imperceptibly influence everything. The tiny choices we make can have profound impacts on the world around us and the future world that we will never live to see. With that in mind, there are a few things I must sound the alarm on in this series. Maybe no one will hear these sirens of mine, but maybe the ripples will have impacts that I simply will never see. Maybe they'll contribute to saving what is in very real danger right now. I hope so. So here is my contribution to the pattern of chaos that we all live in. These are the alarms I am choosing to shout out right now. Hopefully those shouts will produce echoes. Out of the 3 topics I've chosen for this series, I'm going to start with the one that is the most personal to me. We need to have a real talk about doctor-assisted suicide and what allowing it to be legalized out of compassion for suffering is leading to, and if we should decide to turn back before it's too late. Look, my brother took 9 months to slowly die, and it was awful to see a child suffer the way he did. There have been 2 times in my own life when I came close to ending it out of total, unrelenting despair. So I get it. I'm not speaking as someone who has never seen life's darkness and is merely shouting out pretty ideas that don't hold up well against life's ugly realities. I have serious health problems that will only degenerate further during my lifetime. I don't want to end up blind. I don't want that more than I can put into words. And it very well might be what my future holds anyway. I don't want to end up bedridden, in agony, for the last 8 years of my life like my grandmother did. God forbid, if the tumor on my spinal cord ever comes back, I don't want to end up paralyzed and on a ventilator like Christopher Reeves. I admire the hell out of that man and how admirably he continued to live his life. But I think he would understand when I say, I'm not as strong as he was, and I don't want to be him. Not at that unimaginable price. Without his money, which even he eventually ran out of, I'd have nowhere to go in that situation besides a filthy, state-run nursing home, breathing in foul smells and being neglected or even physically abused until I finally, mercifully died. Why do I paint this grim picture for you? Because I need you to understand that I do get it. I'm not talking about these things for no reason. I get that there are people living lives that are worse than death. I get that when you are drowning in the darkness, you just want out, whatever the cost. I get that there are no good options when it comes to these dark realities that most of us would prefer not to think about. I get that we allow doctor-assisted suicide out of compassion for people who are in situations that we hope to never find ourselves in. And I get that deep down, most of us want to preserve that option for ourselves if we end up with an agonizing cancer or paralyzed in a home or with Alzheimer's. And because we want that option for ourselves, safely tucked away in our back pocket just in case, we tell ourselves that it doesn't hurt anyone to keep it there. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, because I didn't want to face it either. But that is not true. It has proven to be an actual slippery slope, not just a theoretical one any longer. And it has and will continue to hurt other people in order for you to retain that option. So, if you decide to go on keeping that option in your back pocket after this article, and refuse to oppose it in order to hold on to this benefit for yourself, you do so knowing that other people are being hurt to give you that option that you want to have. And while choosing to keep it anyway may not be a malicious act, since it hurts other people for you or me to keep it, I don't see how anyone can spin that as anything but selfish. When doctor-assisted suicide first began being legalized, we were told that it was only for those with terminal conditions who were also living in a state of agony. They would die within a few days anyway, and those extra days would be torture for them. So why should they go through that? In our compassion, we decided that this made sense, and they should have a choice. Some people warned even then that it would be a slippery slope, but frankly, we didn't want to hear it. We didn't want to feel as though we were being cruel to the poor people in those situations. So we ignored the warning bells so that we wouldn't have to feel bad about ourselves for denying this option to people that we pitied. And now these warnings have proven true. What started out being a loophole only for those with a terminal illness and already at the end of their journey with only a short while left to live, migrated to applying to those who did not have a terminal illness, but who had no quality of life, like someone who was a quadriplegic. Nordic countries have led the way in accepting these new additions, and Canada has always followed suit soon after. The United States usually lags behind by a few years, but historically, we have only to look to these countries to see what the future holds for us. We consistently accept the things they do just a few years later. In these places, legalized suicide has progressed from an option for those with a terminal illness to an option for those with a non-terminal but life-impacting physical condition, to those with a life-impacting mental condition, regardless of the very real conflict that the fact that they have a mental condition means that they cannot legally give informed consent while choosing to die. That part is important. We accept in our society that certain people cannot give consent. Minors cannot consent to a sexual relationship. So even if they are willing, it is still considered statutory rape. They are too young to understand what they are consenting to, and therefore their consent is invalid. The same is true for people with significant mental handicaps. They may be adults, but if they are mentally diminished in some way, so that they are not able to understand the impact of their decisions, then they also cannot consent to a sexual relationship. Someone taking advantage of them would be guilty of statutory rape as well. People that fall into these various categories cannot sign legally binding contracts, or consent to major surgeries, or enter into certain kinds of relationships on their own, with any sort of legal validity that could be enforced on the basis of those decisions. The fact that someone with a serious mental illness that is unquestionably impacting their judgment, and impacting it so severely that they want to end their life, yet are still legally allowed to do it in these places, as though their diminished decision has a foundation of validity, has continued to have ripple effects elsewhere. If someone with a terminal disease can end their life, why not someone with a non-terminal but still painful disease? And if a person with a terrible physical disease can end their life, why not someone with a terrible mental condition? And if an adult with a mental condition, and therefore not capable of full consent, can end their life, why can't a child suffering in one of these ways end their life? In some of these places, children are now allowed to legally decide to commit suicide. We know on a purely scientific level that the brain is not done developing until around the age of 26. And the part that is left incomplete before that is the decision-making part. Any scientist will tell you this. It's not up for debate. Anyone under this age, no matter how mature they are, does not have the complete part of their brain that is even capable of fully understanding cause and effect and making informed long-term decisions, factoring in those consequences. They simply don't have that ability yet. It is as simple as that. A child may believe that they're Superman one day and very much want to jump off the roof and fly. And the next day, they may want to be a cowboy and ride a bucking bull. The next day, they may want to be in the army and go to war as a soldier. We don't let them do any of those things. Most of them, by the time they're grown, with fully formed brains, will choose not to do these things and make that choice of their own free will. But those who do choose to act on these earlier wishes do so fully understanding the risks involved. They go skydiving, or become professional bull riders at the rodeo, or selflessly decide to serve their country, but only as adults who are capable of making that choice. I don't know about you, but I remember my childhood and my teen years pretty well, and not with a lot of fondness. The teen years especially are full of overwhelming emotions and pessimism. High school is usually a brutal time during which few people fit in. At the time, you may recall that it really does feel as though it will never end, and this will be the way things are for the rest of your life. That's because your brain is not fully formed enough to comprehend the reality that there will be life after high school, and it will be a very different kind of life. If you had had the choice to end your life in the middle of all that misery, would you have done so? It is irresponsible to allow children to make this kind of choice. But if you let adults make the same choice in the same circumstance of a physical diagnosis, or when they are in mental or emotional misery, how can you deny that same option to a child going through the same things? It turns out you can't. So the question is, do we allow everyone to have this option or no one? Because it seems like we are incapable of sticking to a middle ground on most issues, not just this one. Things keep progressing in one direction or another. Nothing stays the same. And children are not the only innocent victims here, although they are certainly the most distressing. Homeless people are being allowed to legally commit suicide in Canada now. Most, not all, but most perpetually homeless people either have severe mental health conditions or severe substance abuse issues. If you are schizophrenic and hearing voices that torment you, or every moment of your life is spent being as high as you can possibly get, how on earth can we even possibly pretend that you can make an informed decision about ending your own life? But apparently that's not necessary. We have decided that consent is the apex factor in all things except in choosing to end your life. Children can do it. The mentally ill can do it. The drug addicted can do it. Who else? Are there any limits that we are willing to stick to? I've seen interviews with people in Canada who are disabled like me. Despite their disabilities, they don't want to die. They still find their lives fulfilling and meaningful, despite the trade-offs they have to make. Yet they are scheduled to die, even though they don't want to. Consent has completely gone out of the window. Why? Because the state has decided that it's cheaper to kill them than to provide them with disability benefits. In Western societies, we have decided to be compassionate to the disabled among us and to the elderly and provide for them in certain ways. But that is an expensive form of collective generosity. And now the state is deciding that these people simply do not have enough value to warrant those costs. If they choose to go on living, they will have no help. And therefore, they cannot afford to stay alive. The state is offering them one benefit. The state will pay for them to die. But they won't pay for them to live. If they choose to live, they will have to find a way to pay for it themselves. which the people being interviewed could not do because of the extent of their disabilities. They have no other options. They are being exterminated as unwanted by their societies. And if I lived there, that would include me. That is where our compassion has led us. And I think you can understand why I would personally find that disturbing. I don't deny my self-interest in this. But that doesn't make my point any less valid just because it's also personal. If you know someone who has a physical disability, or a mental handicap, or who is elderly, or you just fear that one day you could possibly find yourself in one of these groups, and you don't want to be forced into a corner and made to choose suicide, or see someone you love forced into that choice, then you're going to have to take that ace out of your back pocket and start opposing this. Those are the only two options. Veterans are facing the same thing in Canada. I've listened to interviews with a Canadian veteran of the Iraq War describing how friends who were injured while serving their country or are predictably mentally damaged and suffering, and they are also being denied benefits and help. They too are being offered one alternative besides simply suffering. They can choose to die. As a firm supporter of our veterans, I find this appalling and despicable. Someone who suffered physical injuries for their country deserves to be cared for in return so that they can go on living. Someone who has to fight through PTSD and other mental struggles after the horrors of war should be able to get the help they need, not told to go off into a corner somewhere and die. So again, if you have relatives who have served, or you simply honor our heroes like I do, then you are going to have to choose between keeping that ace in your back pocket for yourself or putting their needs first. There is a price to be paid in order to have that ace in your back pocket, and this is it. It's human nature to prioritize ourselves. None of us want to live with a painful terminal condition, or in bad circumstances like being homeless, or with Alzheimer's, not even remembering who we are and frightened of the world around us, with no way out. But I would remind you that those people had a way out before legalized suicide. People have committed suicide throughout all of human history. And when circumstances are bad enough, there is no stopping them. I don't condone it or advise it in any way. I think we should do everything we can to help people in those circumstances and give them another choice besides the final one. But if you're determined to hold on to that card in case you need it one day, as I was for a long time, then, like me, you have to face up to the fact that for you to have that card, veterans, the disabled, and children will be killed as the price. And if you don't like that choice, because it paints it as a selfish one, I can only say I'm being factual, not judgmental, when I say it is a selfish choice. I'm sorry to put it bluntly, but this is a blunt subject. And I am going to sound the alarm on it despite the blowback and resentment for laying out a choice in a way that is no longer disguised from its ugliness and self-centeredness. If legalized suicide returned to being banned, people would still have the same choices they always have. a bottle of pills, etc. Again, I'm not condoning that choice, and I hope people choose life. But I'm trying to point out that the decision I'm putting before you right now is not one where either you have no options in the worst of circumstances, so you let children, veterans, and the elderly and disabled die to give you an option. You would have the same options that people have had throughout all of history. The choice is even more selfish than that. You are letting those people be victimized and die simply so that it is a doctor who is the one handing you that bottle of pills. And when you look at it that way, I don't see how anyone can justify it. Every person has always had the right to be taken off of life support and not be kept alive. That is not doctor-assisted suicide. That is choosing not to be artificially kept alive. Doctor-assisted suicide is a whole different category. That is when you are not dying on your own and merely allowed to die naturally, but rather when you are going to go on living unless you or someone else interferes and makes you die. In the case I brought up about my spinal tumor, if it returned and left me paralyzed on a ventilator, I would have the option to be taken off that ventilator and not artificially kept alive. That would not be considered doctor-assisted suicide. They aren't making me die, they just aren't keeping me alive. I wouldn't be able to breathe on my own, so if I'm left on my own, I can't breathe, I die. If I was paralyzed, but I could still breathe on my own, for instance, that would be a situation that would qualify as doctor-assisted suicide. They would have to do something to me to end my life. Left on my own, I would go on living. Even so, I have made the choice that I cannot justify holding on to that card in my back pocket, even for a circumstance like that, if it means that children and veterans have to die right now, for certain, to buy that card that I might want to use one day. And I hope you decide to make that choice too. Last fall, there was a story that threw this whole issue into vivid relief for me. Indi Gregory was born February 24th, 2023 in Great Britain. She was born with an incurable heart condition. Obviously, as an infant, she could not make decisions for herself. So her parents had the impossible job of deciding how best to help her live out her life. They decided to help her live for as long as medical treatments could make that possible. Britain has socialized medicine, something that many people would advocate for here. But there is a price to be paid for having that system, and Indi Gregory paid it. You may not think it's worth it after hearing this story. When the government pays for your health care, the government also gets to decide when it's worth it and when it's not. They decided that little Indi's life was not worth saving. They decided to not pay for her health care. Case closed. But her parents did not accept that. They appealed to the world for help, and Italy answered. Little Indi was made an Italian citizen so that she could go to the Vatican's pediatric hospital, Bambino Gesù, who offered to completely fund her health care. It seemed like a win-win situation. Britain didn't have to pay, and little Indi could go to Italy with her family and receive care. The only reason that the British government had any right to even have any say in what happened to her was because they had to foot the bill. Now, they didn't. That should have been the end of it. But the mask slipped, and the world saw the ugliness underneath. Even though Britain was no longer paying for Indy's care, and therefore no longer had any justified reason to even want a say in what happened, they blocked her and her parents from leaving the country. This was not a matter of not wanting to fund her care. This was a matter of wanting to control whether she lived or died. They refused to let her devastated parents take her outside of Britain, where they had other options. They even refused to let them take her home so that she could die in her own bed, surrounded by her family. Fearful that the family would make a run for it with a critically ill baby, ludicrous to anyone who has any sort of first-hand experience with how fragile terminal children are by this point. And they were so determined that little Indy would have no chance at life that they forced the family to stay in the hospital as her breathing tube was removed against their wishes. Little Indy Gregory was taken off of life support, and as a fierce storm raged through the night outside, sweet baby Indy died at only 8 months old on November 13th in her mother's arms in a cold and sterile hospital before being allowed to even see her first Christmas. Britain had stopped the families of other infants from receiving care at Bambino Gesù Hospital as well. They had offered to treat other terminally ill British infants before, such as Alfie Evans in 2018 and Charles Gard in 2017, both of whom were ultimately also denied the chance to travel to Italy by the UK's courts and died days after being removed from life support. Quote, "They did succeed in taking Indy's body and dignity, but they could never take her soul. They tried to get rid of Indy without anybody knowing, but we made sure that she will be remembered forever. I knew she was special from the day she was born," her devastated parents told the world. Her father added that they were both angry, heartbroken, and ashamed. And the NHS and the courts not only took away her chance to live a longer life, but they also took away Indy's dignity in the family home where she belonged. Indy Gregory was buried on December 1st after a Catholic funeral service at Nottingham Cathedral. During an earlier interview with the Italian press, her father, who is not Catholic, told reporters that it was his experience of English courts that caused him to have their baby baptized. Quote, "It felt like I had been dragged to hell. It was like the devil was there. And in turn, this led him to the logical conclusion that," quote, "if there's a devil, then God must exist. And I want Indy to go to heaven." On a cold winter's day in England, their baby girl was laid to rest as her father spoke these words. "My greatest comfort at this difficult time is knowing where Indy is and with whom she is now. I had Indy baptized to protect her, so she would go to heaven. It gives me peace to know she is in heaven. God is taking care of her. I will love you always, Indy." Indy's parents, Dean Gregory and Claire Staniforth, placed her favorite musical lamb with her small body inside a white coffin adorned with white and pink flowers. Her parents called her a true warrior, adding, quote, "I honestly and truly feel deep in my heart that Indy was not only beautiful, strong, and unique. I just knew from the start she was very special. Nonetheless, I could never have imagined the sort of journey we and Indy would have to go through to fight for her life. She didn't only have to battle against her health problems, she had to battle against the system that makes it almost impossible to win. Yet it was her weakest point, her health problems, that distinguished Indy as a true warrior. She had fought through not just her heart condition, but seizures, 2 operations, sepsis, E. coli, including other infections that even another child would struggle to beat. James Bogle, an English barrister, or trial attorney for my American listeners, of 30 years, worked on cases similar to Indy's. He outlined what he considers to be troubling about her case. For one, there was no mitochondrial disease expert brought before the court, while at the same time, the court refused permission for 2 authorities on this rare disease, both of whom were professors of pediatric neurology, to argue on behalf of Indy's parents. Bogle points out, quote, both neurologists and experts in mitochondrial disease, whom the courts refused to even hear, disagreed with the withdrawal of treatment. One of them expressly stated from a neurological point of view, there was nothing to prevent Indy from having a reasonable quality of life. He finds it hard to avoid the conclusion that the court, quote, acts in cases such as this with a moral compass that judges some lives less valuable than others. He believes that Indy's case, and others like it, quote, indicate that we are in an increasingly disturbing place. As a disabled person who may one day be put in the same position, I do selfishly ask you to withdraw any support you may have from legalized doctor-assisted suicide programs and to any programs such as socialized medicine that empowers governments to make the decisions regarding one's health that only the individual or their family members should be allowed to make. I am asking that you decide to pull that ace out of your back pocket, if it being there has to be bought with the lives of innocent babies like Indy Gregory. Because what we do in life echoes in eternity. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you again soon.